gospel reading this morning comes from the book of Mark. It's chapter 12, verses 38 through 44. As he taught, he said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have the best seats in the synagogues, and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." Jesus sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called the disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all that she has to live on." This is the word of God for the people of God. So, this Methodist bishop tells a story of when he went to go preach for one of his former students. This former student is now a pastor of a church that has just built a state-of-the-art building. The new sanctuary has stained glass windows which paint biblical scenes on the walls. The kitchen has new, efficient, state-of-the-art appliances which allow the church to feed their community and their church family with much ease. The new classrooms are filled with ministries each day of the week. The scent of fresh paint still hangs in the air. Everything was new, clean, exciting. The building was inviting. But outside this church, the neighborhood looked like a war zone. Windows were boarded up, and the windows that were left open were broken. Glass littered the streets and the sidewalks. Graffiti painted the signs in the buildings. Cars sitting on the side of the road looked like they hadn't been driven in years. And the only people that you saw were very few, and they were moving very quickly down the sidewalk. So the bishop gave the sermon to dedicate this new building. And after the service, the bishop and the pastor were walking back to the office to put away their robes. When they were back in the office, this is their conversation. The bishop said, "Do you have any misgivings about building such a beautiful building in such a poor neighborhood?" And the pastor, his former student, said, "Look, you think the world outside these doors is reality? But it's not. God does not want that. This building here is a protest against that world. This is a place where people get hope and strength to face the world out there. They come here so that they can go back there and start the difficult work of changing that world into God's reality." In our gospel text today, we heard a similar tension between what happens outside of the church and outside of the temple and what goes on the inside. When I read you the text earlier, you might have noticed Jesus' frustration with the scribes. Now, I want to get clear about something real quick. Jesus is certainly not rejecting the Jewish faith. Jesus was a good Jew. But as a good Jew, Jesus he saw a problem with the religious system, and he said something about it. Jesus was concerned about the outward displays of piety and corruption in the temple. This is all within his own tradition. But in reality, Jesus' frustrations can be with any religious system. See, we live in the Bible Belt, and I'm sure we are all a little too familiar with the outward displays of piety in our Christian brothers and sisters. We know people who attend church each Sunday and Wednesday, but don't live Christian lives the rest of the week. So as we revisit this text, I encourage you to keep the people in mind, the people in our context whose outward appearance misrepresents their internal spirituality, and that we remember our struggles to care for those in need in our midst. So when we get to this part in Mark, we find Jesus at the end of a very long teaching section. He warns the crowd in the temple about some of the scribes. Look out for them, Jesus says. You'll notice them. They like to strut around in long flowing robes. They want to be respected and to receive special treatment. They want to be known. Now, some of the scribes are in the audience listening to this, and I'm sure a few of them probably looked down to check out their robes, making sure their robes weren't too long, because these scribes were not practicing the outward displays of piety Jesus denounced. But where do we look when we hear these words? Who do we see strutting around and flaunting piety? What does it look like for us as Christians to outshine one another? Is it the highest steeple, the largest membership roster, or is it the best attendance in Sunday school? So as if Jesus didn't already make it clear who he was talking about, he continues. See, the scribes, they have the best seats in the synagogues, the places of honor at banquets. You will know one when you see one. Then Jesus gets serious. Jesus calls them out. He says, they devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance they say long prayers. Jesus calls out their hypocrisy and warns the crowd not to be fooled by their outward appearance. See, to devour a widow's house was to violate the community's sacred trust in caring for her. One scholar claims that widows, along with resident aliens, the poor, and orphans, were objects of special concern to God, and they were without the usual social support system. He calls the widow's well-being a sacred trust that the community holds in care for them. So to violate this would be a heinous crime. So when we think about the widow, and the contemporary equivalent of devouring the widow's house, we must think of how we violate the sacred trust of others we hold in community. It might look a little different today, but there are still people in our communities which we hold in this sacred trust, who we support, and for whom we even become their social support system. So after Jesus calls out the scribes, he stops. Jesus moves to the side and sits down. Jesus does this a few times in the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus stops, pauses, reflects, and watches. But we're used to seeing Jesus more active, teaching, preaching, healing, serving. But Jesus here watches people give their offering to the treasury. See, the treasury fund was a free will offering meant for redistribution to the poor. And what I really like about this scene is that Jesus is watching those around him. I like the idea of Jesus watching people give. So I wonder if Jesus is still watching today. And I wonder what Jesus sees. What Jesus sees in this text is the poor widow comes forward to place her 2 small coins in the treasury. And here it is as if Jesus presses the pause button and the screen freezes. Jesus draws his disciples together and he tells them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all that she had to live on." The widow here gives out of her poverty, not out of her abundance. Jesus draws the disciples' attention to an ordinary action, giving to the treasury, by one of the more unlikely people, the widow. See, who would have thought that the widow